Hey guys, coming to you with week 3 of the Insideout-life. Reflections, devotions, whatever we want to call these things. And just coming to you today with an idea about guarding our hearts. So last week we talked about the idea that as creatives, as worship leaders, we are often spiritual barometers. We are extra sensitive to our environments. And because of that we are wired this way, we actually need to be really careful about what we are allowing to influence our hearts and minds. And as we read in Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. That's the NIV translation. And I just love the poetic language that the Passion Translation uses. It says, so above all, guard the affections of your heart, for they affect all that you are. Pay attention to the welfare of your innermost being, for from there flows the wellspring of life. And I just love this phrase, innermost being. I'm not sure what your experiences were like or have been like over the last year with, so much uncertainty and shifting and changes. And again, in those lockdown seasons, I wonder if we need to call these the lockdown sessions, because there's so much kind of wisdom, I think, out of those times. But I personally felt like God was doing a lot of work on my innermost being. Things like fear and anxiety, questions around identity, negative thought patterns, just to name a few things. They were, really brought to the surface for me in those stressful times, and maybe for you as well. And I think, honestly, these things are just a very normal response to stressful and uncertain times. It's very normal. But I felt like in many ways God was actually unearthing a lot of things that needed to be dealt with. Things that weren't aligned with His truth or who He is, who He says we are as His children. And again, I think that was part of the gift of this season, that we had the space to actually maybe confront some of these things that we had previously been too busy to look at. For us as worship leaders, there was a particular level of challenge. Another confronting reality for probably most of us is that we were forced into a season of being off the platform, off the stage, out of the public eye, and not necessarily able to express our gifts and use our talents in the way we feel, God had given to us, these ways that God has gifted us in leading our people in congregational worship. Very early on, when the pandemic first hit, I was in a Zoom conference. It was an international Zoom call with worship leaders from all around the world. They were grappling with, what do we do in this season? Back when Zoom was a novelty and it was actually fun to be on. But I remember one of the leaders in this session putting an idea out there that perhaps we needed to reframe some of the challenges of this time of being isolated, and actually reframe it to embracing it as a season of deliberate solitude, where we could actually draw aside and spend time in the secret place, foster our own personal worship lives off the platform. And I really loved that idea. And if you're a worship leader watching this right now, I wonder, what was your experience during that time? Did you come across these same challenges? And if so, what did you choose to do at that time? Or maybe even you're still facing these challenges now. Did you allow God to draw you back to His heart and to continue to develop your own personal worship life and just choose to sing to an audience of one? The truth is, no matter how big our platform is, we are always, first and foremost, singing to an audience of one. And I feel like that is still one of the challenges that God is putting before us today, is to keep guarding our hearts, to guard that intimacy that with God that we may have developed in that season in our private lives, and to be very protective about who and what we let back in to influence our inner lives. As we get back up on our stages, as we welcome people back into our buildings, which, let's face it, it's glorious, isn't it? Let's keep leading worship from that place of deep intimacy with Jesus, and let's stay committed to allowing God to work on those inner parts of our lives, who we are when we're not on the platform, our innermost beings. 2 ways I think we can be guarding our hearts in this time. The first one is, again, just guard your personal times with God. Prioritize your private worship times and the times in the secret place. I said the same thing 2 weeks ago. Let us be jealous in a good way to keep these times a priority above all else. I really believe that God wants us to know Him deeper, and He wants to lead us into new ways, and He wants to lead His church forward. And my sense is that worshippers, worship leaders are going to be on the forefront of this. So we need to know Him like never before. We need to hear His heart and be aligned with Him. So let's keep prioritizing those private worship times. Number 2 is guard what influences you are letting shape you. Be careful what you're watching, what you're letting your mind take in, what you're reading, who you're listening to, whose voices you're listening to. Be mindful of the TV shows and what impact they might be having on you. Even the news, as great as it is, we need to stay connected with our world, but be careful not to let the fear and the anxiety of what's presented rock your sense of peace and purpose in God. Guard even what voices and opinions you take on. I would encourage you just to hold everything up to the mirror of who God is and what His word says. Let these things be your firm foundation. Let's be really wary in this season of just guarding our hearts and keeping God at the forefront of all that we do.